This is the Nothing Phone 1, and out of every device released this year, this was actually the one I was the most excited to try. And the reason for this was because on paper, it seemed to me like nothing really nailed the choices that they made with this phone in terms of prioritizing features that I place high value on, whilst also stripping away features that I personally don't really care for, resulting in a phone with a more mid-range price tag, but that didn't seem like it had that many compromises. And so after using this device for the past month, the question really is, has nothing succeeded? Have they actually struck a winning combo with this phone that makes it a viable option for a wide audience? Well, let's find out. As always, we're gonna start with the design. And for me, as fun as the back of this phone is with those glyph lighting elements, I was actually much more interested in the front of this phone. So in a day and age of pretty much all flagship phones having curved displays and all mid-range or budget phones with flat displays having uneven bezels, nothing has managed to pull off the excellent combination of both a flat display with consistently sized bezels all the way around. And I seriously love it. And then on top of that, the phone also has these super flat edges with a matte coating, which makes the phone so nice to hold in the hand. And yes, I know it is dangerously similar to the design language of the recent iPhone lineups, but I actually love the design and in-hand feel of the iPhone lineup. So the fact that we have a very similar looking and feeling phone in the Android world now is something I'm not complaining about. Now, obviously can't talk about the design of this phone without at least providing some thoughts on the glyph lighting elements on the back. But look, unless you're someone who is happy to place your phone screen down everywhere you go, you'll otherwise probably find these glyphs to be nothing but a cool party trick. I mean, we live in a dirty world, folks, and I place a high priority on having a phone screen that is free from even the tiniest of marks. And so I really don't like the idea of having to place my phone screen down really anywhere. So whilst I appreciate the unique design approach and I'm happy for these lighting glyphs to remain a part of the design language going forward, I do still think that they're quite gimmicky. But then moving on to the display, and again, another point needs to be awarded to Nothing for sticking a high quality 120Hz panel on this mid-range device. In a world where the Pixel 6a was just released, which Google opted to give a 60Hz display, as well as the base iPhone 14 devices, again, both of which have 60Hz displays, I really appreciate that we don't have to compromise with the display on the Nothing Phone 1. Now, there have been some minor controversies around this display since launch, including talks of green tint issues at low brightness levels, or the phone's max brightness not actually matching what the original spec sheet said. And whilst I would love for Nothing to add a high brightness mode toggle that power users could enable in a future software update, for the most part, this display has really been a true joy to use. It easily competes with the Pixels of the world in terms of display brightness. It doesn't have any significant tinting issues that I haven't seen on every other high refresh rate panel I've used. And in all honesty, it's just a super fluid panel that I really enjoy using. Another aspect I was pleasantly surprised by with this phone in terms of build quality were the haptics. Again, this is a feature I personally place a high priority on when it comes to whether I truly enjoy using a phone or not, and thankfully, Nothing has put a quality haptic motor in this phone. Now, it's clear that there's a lot of room for improving the software side of things with the haptics because they do have that very metallic feel to them, kind of like there's been no software tuning at all, and they definitely don't match the incredibly subtle yet clicky haptics of the S22 or Pixel 6 lineup of devices. But the fact that we don't have to put up with a mushy haptic motor for Nothing's first phone is just another factor that tells me that Nothing are placing their priorities in the right areas. Now, the fingerprint sensor, on the other hand, needs a lot of refining because it has been very hit and miss since day one of using this phone. Sometimes it's blazing fast, but then other times it just blatantly refuses to detect my fingerprint even after 4 or 5 attempts. Again, I do think this is a case of software implementation here rather than the actual hardware being used. So hopefully it can get better with future software updates because as of right now, it definitely needs some improving. All right, before we press on, I just wanted to take a quick moment to thank today's video sponsor, AirDroid Parental Control. Now, as someone with kids myself, I've got to be honest. As much as I love tech and the digital world, I am a little bit nervous for when the time comes that my kids are old enough to have their own phones, because I want to ensure that they develop good digital habits as they grow up. And so one such tool that will absolutely help to lighten the load is AirDroid Parental Control. This is an app that works on both Android and iOS, and all you do is install it on a parent's device, then on a child's device, and once set up, you'll be able to use the various tools to help keep your kids safe from online danger. This includes being able to access your child's phone camera or microphone remotely in case you ever need to see or hear the surroundings of where they are. It also includes real-time screen mirroring, location tracking, plus you'll also get a complete list of any notifications that they receive, which is really handy. You can even set up app and screen time restrictions remotely, plus there's a stack of other really useful features as well. So if you're interested in learning more about how you can protect your own children in this digital world, then check out AirDroid Parental Control using the first link down in the description below. Okay, let's now chat about the software on this phone. And for me, this is actually one of the best aspects of the Nothing Phone 1. Firstly, it is running a very clean and lightweight Pixel-esque software skin, with the only real discernible difference being that Nothing uses a different system font throughout various parts of the OS. But not only does this mean we get a very familiar settings menu to Pixel phones, as well as that fancy quick settings panel redesign, but we get an almost identical version of the lock screen and always on display implementation, which is amazing. In fact, last month I made a video showcasing 20 Pixel exclusive features that I wish would be brought to non-Pixel phones, and the very first feature I talked about was the always on display implementation. And wouldn't you know, we literally have nearly the exact same implementation here on the Nothing phone, just with that slightly different font. I love it. Now, whilst the quick settings panel does look very similar to the one found on Pixel phones, Nothing have slightly modified its look when expanded by changing those larger toggles at the top into circles. And the network one here on the left can even be swiped over to reveal a dedicated Wi-Fi toggle and a dedicated hotspot toggle. Except they're not actually toggles. Tapping on each of these so-called toggles actually just opens up that silly network menu, which actually means you have to perform more actions to turn on or off your Wi-Fi than you need to on Pixel phones. And at least Pixel phones have a dedicated hotspot toggle, because it's the same issue here where to turn on or off the Nothing phone's hotspot, I have to swipe over 3 times, tap this shortcut, then turn it on or off via this menu. Seriously annoying. But one thing that really did please me though about the software on this phone was that even though it initially launched with a very similar home screen launcher to the Pixel launcher, complete with unremovable at a glance and search bar widgets, Nothing actually listened to user feedback and pushed a software update that let users disable both of those widgets. And I really appreciated this change. You can also use third-party icon packs with the Nothing launcher, which is really cool, but my only gripe with this launcher is that the grid sizing options are very limited. In fact, there's only 2, 4x6 and 5x6, and with either setting enabled, the icons all look huge. It's like they've been set to the maximum size possible, but there's no way to scale them down. So Nothing, if you're watching, I'd love it if you would introduce a few more grid sizing options. In fact, dare I ask for upwards of 7 to 8 columns by 9 or 10 rows? I mean, that would be amazing. But then whilst I'm asking, I'd love it if you would also please consider adding an option to disable app labels on the home screen, as well as adding an option to decrease the icon sizing and to hide apps from the app drawer. And if you made those changes, then we'd be in serious business. Normally, I wouldn't hold out any hope for these sorts of requests, but given that they've already let us disable the search bar and at a glance widgets due to user feedback, I feel like there is a chance that the Nothing launcher could be made one of the best stock launchers available on any phone. Now, aside from that, you obviously don't get any of those really nice Pixel exclusive features like the various overview menu tweaks, and there's even no one-handed mode, which is kind of strange, but there is this little pop-up view feature, which has actually been implemented really well. Just 2 other things to comment on regarding software. The first of which being the lack of Android 13 until next year apparently. And whilst this is slightly disappointing, if not a bit surprising given how stock this software experience is, I'm not all that upset given how similar Android 12 and 13 are. I would actually much prefer nothing refining Android 12 until it is flawless and a little more feature rich, instead of rushing an Android 13 build that is a buggy mess. Now, if Android 13 was a huge redesign, then maybe I'd be a little more eager to see it on this phone sooner than next year. But honestly, given that the upgrade is so subtle, I doubt many people would even notice it anyway. But the second thing I want to comment on and commend nothing on is how easy it is to unlock root access with this phone. And in fact, for those wondering, I have in fact unlocked root access with the Nothing Phone 1. It's just about as easy as it is on a Pixel phone, which is fantastic. And I only wish Nothing would match Google by providing direct access to their software OTA files on their website on the day that they're released. That would solve the slow update rollout issue that has caused many users not to receive OTAs until sometimes weeks after they're initially released. So having those files available on their website from day dot would be amazing for those of us in the modding community. Okay, touching on performance real quick, and this is probably the area that I was the most nervous about because Nothing opted to go with the 778G Plus chipset, which is definitely not a flagship level chip. But what kind of gave me hope was that Nothing actually worked in direct partnership with Qualcomm to make a modified version of the chip. It actually kind of reminded me a little bit of how Google worked with Samsung to make a modified Exynos chip that they then called the Tensor chipset. And whilst there were initially a number of bugs present with earlier versions of the software, in my experience, they've pretty much all been fixed now. There was one really annoying issue in particular where 70% of the time, whenever you opened an app via a notification on the lock screen, the phone would kind of crash and then take you back to the lock screen. But thankfully, that is completely fixed now. There were also some scrolling issues with Twitter and the Play Store, but again, those have been fixed as well. So whilst things were a little rocky early on, the phone now performs very reliably and, dare I say, is one of the smoothest software experiences you'll come across on an Android, period. Now, I need to make it clear, I'm not a gamer at all, so I can't comment on how this phone performs when playing high intensity games. I literally only downloaded this Subway Surfer game to film this video, but as far as everyday performance goes, this phone actually feels nearly identical to the Pixel 6 lineup of phones, and even Samsung's top-end phones. Mid-range chipset, it hardly feels like it. Oh, and speaking of that chipset, one of the modifications Nothing made to the 778G Plus chipset was adding wireless charging. And in all honesty, whilst a lack of wireless charging is not necessarily a deal breaker for me, it is one of those features that I really appreciate having, and it goes a long way to making a phone feel more like a top-end flagship phone, mainly due to the fact that hardly any budget or mid-range devices offer it. However, whilst I love that this phone has wireless charging, one of the bigger downsides with this phone has been battery life. No joke, in the past month plus of using this phone, the amount of days it has died well before I'm heading into bed has far outnumbered the days it has survived heading into bed. If there has been a day of very light use, it might manage to sneak itself to the end of the day with about 10% of battery life remaining, but most days it's dead before 9 PM and sometimes even earlier. With that being said, battery life is not actually an out and out deal breaker for me, given that I'm always around chargers and have no problem topping up my phones throughout any given day. But if you're someone who relies on great battery life, well then this phone definitely ain't the one for you. I will just add though, in a recent software update, Nothing did add in Google's adaptive battery feature, which I've found to work wonders on Pixel phones after about 3 to 4 weeks of use. And I think I have started to see some small improvements in the past week or so. So fingers crossed, the battery life on this phone can take itself from being a C, C+, to being more of a B+. But that still remains to be seen. Now, the last piece of the puzzle are the cameras, and this truly is the most consistent area that you'll find most budget and even mid-range devices skimping out on. Now, I do appreciate that Nothing didn't opt to place a silly macro lens or depth sensor on the back of the phone to try and trick consumers into thinking it was a triple or quad camera configuration. I seriously do not like it when manufacturers do that, and I really appreciated this tweet from Nothing CEO Carl Pei saying that 2 good cameras is better than 1 good camera and 3 cheap cameras, which I totally agree with. So I was quietly hopeful that somehow the Nothing Phone 1 would ship with amazing cameras straight from the get-go, which is a feat rarely achieved by debut smartphones. But then early image samples started showing up from consumers and reviewers, and I became a little bit concerned. Whilst the main lens seemed to be okay in good conditions, it didn't fare as well in low light, and that ultra-wide lens was producing some pretty awful looking images. And I thought, well, that's really a shame. The cameras are gonna be the downfall of this phone. But then a software update was pushed, and then another, and then another. And with every new software update that's come and gone, the image quality has actually started getting a lot better, to the point where I would say that the cameras on this phone are actually now above average for phones of a similar price. Now, are they as good as Pixel phones or even Samsung's S22 devices? Definitely not. However, I did actually install a Gcam mod from Dot, and I've been using that in conjunction with the stock camera app, and the results, as expected, have been really impressive. I'll link the particular mod I've been using below because seriously folks, with this mod installed, this phone is able to capture images that are pretty dang close to those from the Pixel 6a. And so whilst I initially had all sorts of concerns about why this phone might end up being a disappointment, in actual real world use, I've really enjoyed using it. And even more than that, I can actually see myself coming back to using this phone as my main everyday long-term device at the end of the year once I've finished reviewing every other device still to be released. It's got a fantastic design, a great display, excellent software and performance, solid haptics, wireless charging, and pretty decent cameras, all for what I think is a great value price. What it does make me really excited for though is a flagship phone from nothing. If you kept everything the same about this phone but added in a quality 3x telephoto lens, a beefed up battery, and a flagship chipset for perhaps $200 or $300 more, then that phone would be, in my opinion, an absolute out and out flagship killer. Nothing, if you're watching, I seriously tip my hat to you for a fantastic debut phone that has gotten even better with each and every software update, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with next.